Welcome to the Hodjo on Architecture Podcast Season 8, The Architecture of Experience. Chapter 1, Ergonomics Reframed, From Measurement to Experience. This season is called The Architecture of Experience. Over the next 10 episodes, we will explore how ergonomics is not simply a technical discipline concerned with measurements, standards, and bodily limits, but a deeper framework through which architecture begins to engage with the lived reality of the human body. We are not approaching ergonomics as a checklist of dimensions, nor as a neutral system of optimization, and certainly not as a constraint imposed upon design creativity. Instead, we will read it as a spatial language, a way of understanding how bodies move, perceive, hesitate, and adapt within space. Across the season, we will move from the body to movement, from movement to perception, and from perception to atmosphere. Because before we decide how space should look, we must first understand how it is experienced, and that experience does not begin with form but with the body that inhabits it. Ergonomics is often introduced to design students in the most reductive way possible, appearing primarily as numbers, standards, and diagrams of seated figures, reach distances, and circulation widths. It is presented as something to be memorized, applied, and quickly set aside, a necessary but uninspiring step in the design process. In this form, ergonomics becomes what many students quietly assume it to be, a limitation that restricts creativity rather than a framework that expands it. However, this interpretation is deeply misleading because when ergonomics is reduced to measurement, its fundamental purpose is obscured. At its core, ergonomics is concerned not with numbers, but with the human condition within space. This does not refer to an abstract or statistical human, but to a situated, moving, and perceiving body that continuously interacts with its environment. The body gets tired, shifts posture, reaches beyond comfort, pauses before entering a room, and senses discomfort long before it can articulate it. These subtle interactions form the true subject of ergonomics, yet they are rarely addressed explicitly in design education. As a result, what should be understood as a rich, experiential layer of design is instead reduced to a technical checklist. This compression is not accidental. Ergonomics, as a discipline, has long relied on quantification to become operational within design systems. Anthropometric data, normal distributions, and percentile ranges allow designers to make informed decisions applicable across populations. These tools are essential, as without them, design would lack consistency, safety, and scalability. However, they are also inherently limited, because no dataset can fully represent the variability and unpredictability of human experience. The so-called average human exists only as a statistical construct, a convenient abstraction that simplifies complexity but does not reflect reality. This creates a fundamental tension at the heart of ergonomics. On one side lies the need for standardization, which enables designers to produce spaces that are functional and accessible at scale. On the other side lies the diversity of human life, where bodies differ not only in size and proportion, but also in ability, behavior, cultural context, and expectation. Designing ergonomically, therefore, does not mean resolving this tension, but rather learning how to operate within it. It requires an awareness that every design decision simultaneously includes and excludes, supports and constrains, enables and limits. Once this tension is acknowledged, ergonomics begins to shift from a purely technical discipline into a conceptual one. The central question is no longer, what is the correct dimension, but rather, what kind of experience does this dimension produce? This shift is subtle but transformative because it reframes design decisions as experiential conditions rather than numerical solutions. A chair, for instance, is not merely defined by height, depth, and angle, but by posture, duration, and bodily engagement. It invites certain behaviors while discouraging others, shaping how the body occupies space over time. Despite this, design education often separates the measurable from the experiential, treating ergonomics as an isolated domain rather than an integrated layer within spatial thinking. Students learn dimensions in one context, spatial composition in another, and atmosphere in yet another, with little explicit connection between them. The expectation is that these elements will eventually converge through intuition, but without a clear framework, this integration remains inconsistent. The result is a fragmented understanding of design, where technical correctness does not necessarily translate into meaningful experience. This season attempts to reconnect these fragments by positioning ergonomics as a continuous presence within the design process. Instead of being treated as a preliminary requirement or a final check, it becomes an active agent that informs decisions from the very beginning. If the body is taken seriously, not as data, but as presence, then every spatial decision acquires an ergonomic dimension. Circulation becomes not only a matter of movement, but also of effort, rhythm, and anticipation. Thresholds are understood not just as boundaries, but as moments of transition and hesitation. Furniture is no longer seen merely as an object, but as an interface between the body and space. Through this lens, architecture begins to shift from a focus on composition to a focus on experience. Space is no longer evaluated solely in terms of form and visual coherence, but also in how it is lived, navigated, and perceived over time. This perspective brings ergonomics closer to a phenomenological understanding of space, though it remains grounded in design practice rather than abstract theory. It asks not only what space is, but how it appears to the body, how it is encountered through movement, and how it is remembered through sensation. At the same time, ergonomics resists becoming purely subjective by maintaining its connection to measurable conditions. It operates between data and intuition, between scientific observation and design interpretation, offering a framework that bridges these domains rather than choosing between them. This dual position is precisely what gives ergonomics its potential as a design tool, yet it is also what makes it difficult to define and teach. It requires designers to think simultaneously in terms of systems and experiences, standards and exceptions, general rules and specific conditions. This complexity also challenges the dominance of visual thinking within architectural discourse. Design is often communicated through drawings, images, and representations that prioritize how space appears rather than how it is experienced. Plans and sections describe spatial relationships, but they rarely capture effort, balance, resistance, or comfort. These aspects emerge only through use, through the interaction between body and environment. As a result, a significant dimension of design remains invisible, not because it is absent, but because it is not easily represented. Ergonomics offers a way to engage with this invisible dimension by shifting attention from appearance to interaction. It encourages designers to consider not only how space is formed, but how it is inhabited, how it responds to the body, and how it evolves through use. This does not replace visual thinking, but it expands it, introducing a layer of understanding that operates beyond representation. Once this shift occurs, design is no longer understood as a static composition, but as a dynamic process in which space and body continuously influence one another. This has important implications for how we define architectural precision. Precision is often associated with exact measurements and technical accuracy, yet in the context of ergonomics, it takes on a different meaning. It becomes a question of alignment between intention and experience, of how effectively a design translates conceptual ideas into lived conditions. A space may be dimensionally correct yet experientially inadequate, just as it may deviate from standards while offering a richer, more responsive interaction with the body. To design ergonomically is therefore not simply to follow rules, but to engage critically with them, understanding both their necessity and their limitations. It involves recognizing that space is never neutral, that it always anticipates and shapes human behavior, and that design decisions carry experiential consequences. In this sense, ergonomics does not constrain architecture but deepens it, providing a framework through which design can become more attentive, more responsive, and ultimately more human. In the next chapter, we will move from this general framework to its most immediate and fundamental condition, the body itself. We will examine how the presence of the body transforms space from an abstract container into a field of interaction, and how the question of who is this space for begins to reveal underlying assumptions within design practice. The discussion will shift from experience to embodiment, from spatial conditions to bodily presence, and from general principles to specific uses. Because once space is understood as something that is lived, the next question becomes unavoidable: whose body is being considered and whose is being overlooked? This concludes Chapter 1 of the Architecture of Experience, Ergonomics Reframed, From Measurement to Experience. Thanks for listening. See you in the next episode.